My name is Kent Bai, and this is going to be a live stream where I'm going through a number of different VConsole commands for Half-Life Alyx. And so if you are a VR developer or you want to start to experiment around with seeing what commands are available, if you want to start creating your own Half-Life Alyx levels, or if you just want to unpack the experiential design of Half-Life Alyx, which is an amazing game, I found myself wanting to see the maps and explore around and just learn about how Valve had created this game. And so there's a number of different tools I'm going to be walking through in this video if you would like to do the same. And it's geared for VR developers. And so this is not a video where it's trying to explain, if you want to play the game in 2D, I don't recommend that. But the 2D commands are really great to be able to actually locomote around. And if your primary intention is to be looking at different aspects of the design, then sometimes it's not only more performant to look at it on 2D, but it's also easier to get around. So that's part of the deeper intention. So let's go over to here. And so this is a gist that I put together. It's Half-Life Alyx VConsole commands for VR developers and modders. And so first off is that you have to, find a way to actually enable the VConsole commands. And so I'm actually going to go over into Steam over here. Let's see. Okay, come on. All right. And I go over into properties, and there's the, let's see, launch options. Let's see. Set the launch options. So the -console, -vconsole, and -dev. So the console and vconsole are just ways that once you launch the application, you can hit the backslash, the backtick, or the tilde key without hitting shift, and it'll bring up the console. I'll show that here in a second. And the dev actually brings up some developer tools so that when you're in VR, you can actually start to look at some of these different options while you're in VR. And it's actually got a really cool locomotion feature where you can basically locomote anywhere. So that's that. So as we launch into Half-Life Alyx, I have it launched here. And actually, if you hit the backslash, you'll have the VConsole come up. And when you first launch up Half-Life Alyx, it will always sort of ask you to pull the trigger. But what it's doing at the back end is actually just pausing. And so, hold on, let me just make sure everything is good here. I'm going to move over into just this view without my face. Okay, so if you click pause, then actually, let me unmute that. So we have the whole first part of the valve is coming up, and I can't move around yet because I don't have the VR Fly enabled. So these God mode and the weapons, there's a ton of different tutorial videos that go over all these, and I'll be sort of briefly going over them, but I'm going to jump to the VR Fly enabled, which is, I think, the main thing here. So if you're just on your PC and your computer and you want to be able to get around, so you can do VR Fly enabled 1, and then once you do that, then you should be able to, I'm moving my mouse around. I don't have a VR headset on, and I can actually, start to fly around the space. And no clip is enabled by default. No clip allows you just to basically fly through walls. So if we want to load in a map here, there's a command just by map, and then if you see, you'll see all the different map worlds. And some of these worlds aren't actually the worlds. The backslash. I don't know if those are still developer or whatnot, but most of the main maps are here. And I'm actually going to go to Pistol here. And so let's load that in. So each time you load in a map, it's actually going to reset a lot of these options, I believe. And so to do the VR Fly enabled. And so I'm just going to kind of walk through the process for the types of stuff that I've been doing. And some of the deeper intentions for trying to unpack some of the different experiential design of Half-Life Alyx. Let's see here. Let's get my face in here as this is loading in. So just as a brief oops, let's go to this. And this is all new live stream stuff here for me. But these commands, I'm going to be going through these commands here real quick. The flying in the developer mode is also really cool. I'll be hopping into VR for that. But let's first do the VR fly enabled. So quick caveat here is that Valve created a lot of tools that the developers at Valve could use, and they actually got leaked into one of the pre-releases for Half-Life Alyx, and those commands are still out there, and I'll be talking about that at the end. Those are a lot more robust to be able to do a lot more interactions within virtual reality. These commands are just to be able to fly around, and they're in the final version, but they're really pared down because Valve actually took out a lot of the commands to be able to interact with the game because it's not really a great experience, and so they wanted to take it out for the consumers, but for developers, it's actually still useful. So I'll be diving in at the end here for the developer version, but these versions are still enabled. And so what you can do is that whenever you pull up a level, it'll be completely dark. And so you'll need to, first of all, bring up the VConsole by hitting the / key, and then you can hit pause. And once you hit pause, then you'll see the level will start up here. It looks like I already have the VR fly enabled, but as I'm flying around, you can see my hands. And if you wanted to just fly around without having your hands in a way, you can do a VR no hands 1. So let's see if that works here. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Well, anyway, this is all very experimental. But changing the flying speed. So the flying speed, if you're trying to like create different shots, so if you just hit the VR fly speed, you can see it's at 200. And so if you wanted to just make it like super slow as you are, if you wanted to create some cinematic shots, you can, as you move around, then it's a little bit slower here. So I have the spectral, there's different options to, I'm actually going to mute this. There's some sections here that I'll be looking at later, and I'll go back to just the screen. Okay, I'll have to get another monitor, I think. All right, so back to this. Okay, so the VR fly enabled, the speed, if you want to go slower, I think 250 is a good there for that. And that should be a 0 there to jump back into VR. But let's fly around here a little bit. So actually, I'm going to enable a couple other things that I think are useful. So the SV cheats to be able to get into the God mode, I do that, and then I do to be invincible, you can do the God mode. But a thing that I also find helpful is no target, and what that will do is even if you're running around, it's basically like the enemies can't see you. So even though there's an enemy here, and I go through here, they can't actually see me, and so because of that, it's not chasing after me. And so if you just wanted to kind of like fly around, you can, and you can like zoom up and look down at different levels and go down, and you can actually look at the levels from below, and you can kind of zoom around. The main point for this for me was to be able to start to understand the different aspects of experiential design, and I'll be getting into some of the other developer modes that I think are really helpful for doing that. But you can do the WASD keys to essentially like fly around here. And if you wanted to go back into regular mode, so you can do VR fly enable 0, and that will kick you back down. And if you wanted to put on your VR headset here and like sort of hop into VR, it'll put you back down there, and you can kind of hop into VR there. So let's go back to this here. So there's other things to give yourself all the weapons, all the upgrades. And there's some developer tools that I want to dive into here next. And the one thing the developer tools don't have is infinite ammo and infinite reload. So if you do want that, those are two helpful. But for me, I'm not really necessarily focused on, the gameplay of fighting the enemies. I'm mostly just wanting to look at things. And if you want to get the rapid fire SMG early. The Buddha, I haven't used as much, but if you wanted to have a little bit more of being able to take damage but still not die, so you could kind of like imagine that you wanted to see if you could make it through level, but there's not as much at stake there. So there's that. All right, so the VR Fly enabled, there's that. So the developer mode, so I'm gonna actually jump into VR to be able to kind of go into this, because this is really cool. So having that -dev will enable these developer tools. So I'm just going to be sitting here and make sure, okay, everything is good. Let's hop into VR. And I am floating up in the air. So let's like go down here. And okay, so I'm going to shoot this, and you can notice that the zombie doesn't even care about me because the no target is on. So I'm not sure, actually. I'm going to turn on the menu, and I have to double check and see if you can even see the menu. So you cannot see the menu. Oops, hold on. Oh yeah, you can. Okay, so you can see the menu. I pushed the wrong menu. Okay. So once you turn on the dev options, you actually have to go and save, and then the dev menu will start to come up. So with the dev menu, I can click on dev menu, and then I have all these different dev options. So the first one I wanted to show is the dev teleport, which once that's enabled, it gives me this like little green thing that I have to pull out my hand, and it allows me to basically like teleport. So I can like teleport upwards here. And I can't fly. I tried to put in the blink or the continuous locomotion. There's blink, continuous, and another hand locomotion. But this one just lets me basically sort of throw out this little capsule and be able to look at things, to basically go anywhere that I want to. So it's the same thing as the VR Fly enabled, but the thing that I didn't mention about the VR Fly enabled is that you cannot have your VR headset on because it doesn't actually allow you to look around. It locks the HMD. So you have to look at VR Fly enabled in 2D. Otherwise, you can look at it, but it's just really miserable because you're looking around with your mouse, and it's just not a good experience at all. Okay, so I'm going to show some stuff here about the lighting. So you can see this hallway has some very interesting lighting. Now, if we go into the this message here, tog matte full bright, that is going to essentially take away all the lighting, and it's going to just fully light everything. So now it looks terrible, but you can get a sense of what things look like without all the specific lighting. Now there's some additional tools that I may dive into later in this video, depending on how long it ends up being, to be able to kind of show some other options that are there for being able to sort of look at the lighting. But this is just to get a sense of how the lighting affects the scene. So you can go and toggle that back, and when you toggle it back, everything will be dark, but that, if you just get out of the menu, you'll see the regular lighting. So that's helpful for that. I'm going to show you my favorite one. It's the int messages draw to. So when I turn this on, what happens is whenever I'm going to actually turn the disabled to teleport and just do regular teleport. So you see these little red boxes here? Those are actually triggers for different audio and sound. I'm actually going to unmute the sounds here just so you can sort of see a little bit better. Okay, I'm going to turn this up a bit. Okay, so you can see there's these little things that say add. So actually you can, as I'm grabbing this, you see all the different logic, and what's happening is, what's happening is that I need to, there we go. Oops, I just hit my microphone. I'm sitting down at my desk, and I'm a little occluded. So you can see there, I just triggered him to stand up. And now he's not going to chase after me because I don't have that enabled, but you can see that there's these little boxes that come up, and when you go by them, it actually triggers a number of things. So you can see apply relationship there. So you can start to actually deconstruct a little bit of what is happening in the back end. As I am breaking these down, you see all the different, and now I can get through there. So I find this really helpful to not only see the triggers for the code and the logic, but you actually see a lot of the sound cues. So if I go over here, I might, trigger one of these sound cues. Yeah, there's more sound. All right, so that's that one. I'm gonna stop the audio there for a second. And turn that down. Okay, so mute that. Okay, what else? So that's the int draw messages, draw 1 and 2. There's another one called show triggers. I'm going to show that, but let me go through the rest of these dev tools just to see if there's any other things that are worth mentioning there. Actually, I'm going to enable the dev teleport and just sort of get out, just to get away from those folks that are making a lot of noise. Okay, so let's see. Turn left, right, quick save, quick load. That's just view maps. You can go to any level quickly, any sub level. Now I'll be going through a list of all the different map files and how they kind of break down in the chapters later. The Impulse 101, 102, again, that's giving yourself all of the ammo as well, and all the weapons, and then all the upgrades, but no ammo. So you can turn the God mode and the no target, and that's basically what you need as a developer, because as a developer, you're not necessarily like playing all the game. And you can restart the level. Oh, this int text is actually really interesting. I'm gonna go back down to these zombies just to be able to do the int text. Where are they at? Okay. All right, so yeah, you have these zombies here. I'm actually going to disable the int draw messages, so that's just out of the way. Okay, so the int draw text, what that does is that now that I click that, I have all of this metadata that is available for these enemies, and you can see it gets quite involved. Actually, that's the enemy. He just walked by there. So it's actually in 2D mode. This is a little bit easier because it is on the screen without having to chase it around. But when you're in VR, it's also good as well. These enemies actually have a lot of different parameters. And as you go into the different hammer tools within the SDK, you can start to have all these different flags and whatnot. But you can start to actually interrogate different aspects of each of these people. Now, when you do this in the 2D mode, I found it difficult to get rid of, but in the VR mode, it's a little bit easier. Although here, I'm able. It's basically anything that you are pointing at when you have the menu. So I find if you have the menu and then you turn it on, and then whatever you're kind of generally looking at, and you push int text, you should be able to. Let's see if I get int text. You should be able to do the other objects as well. I can't get it to work here as much. Maybe there's just a lot of other things that I have there. But that basically allows you to look at the entity properties of all these different objects. Okay, so that's that int view, the tog of Fulbright is the map. So we did all the developer views, and this has a nice user interface. So you can go back and forth. I actually found that as I was teleporting around, I wanted to switch my my handedness to be my right hand, because it was more about having to click the entity text and to be able to do the teleport. Was a little bit harder to do with my secondary hand rather than my primary hand, because my primary hand's not focused on fighting folks. All right, so I'm hopping out of VR here for a second, and actually I'm gonna get out of that, so that shows up there. Let's go back to my little cheat sheet here. So, okay. The physics, that's just turning on the physics wireframes. I'm not going to show that specifically. Now, so I'm going to go back to, well, I'm going to show position. So if you want to know where you're at on the map, one of the commands that you can do, actually, I haven't even brought up the VConsole. So I bring up the VConsole by hitting the back tilde key, and then I do the show position. And then you can see here, actually, I'm going to enable the VR Fly. VR Fly enabled. Enabled equals 1. And then now I can kind of fly around. So you can see the coordinates there are updating as to where I'm at. And those give you different positions. Now, one of the things that is interesting is this... down later, they have the soundscapes where you have different triggers, and there's 226 soundscapes. But with each of the soundscapes, there's a command to actually see where those soundscapes begin and end. And so I have the corresponding to the get position is the set position. So you can see what the position is, and then you can get to that position later, or you can potentially place specific objects there. So I'm in the pistol world. So this is chapter 2, quarantine entrance, pistol, after I've gotten into the quarantine. And so if I sort of go into one of these and set position here and copy this is like the 4th of the soundscape entities. And let's try to set the position here. And then now you can see that I've moved back to this position here, which creates another soundscape. And if I want to go to another location, I can go to set position here. And then I wonder if that works. Actually, that copying that includes the tabs, and it doesn't like that. So, okay, so here's another position here. So once you get to this point, then all the other music stops and it creates a new soundscape. So one of the questions I was having was like, how do you make sense of this is a linear piece, and so how do you make sense of breaking it down into different sections? And actually, there's a CL soundstage print debug 1. If I do this here and print that out, I get all of these different soundscapes. It's essentially all this information here. Client soundscapes, 226 total. So there's secondary and primary soundscapes. This is like both the secondary and the primary soundscapes here, and I'm differentiating that because there's another command that I can do, which is oh boy, where's the command? Corresponding soundscapes to different worlds. Let's see if I have that here. List all client soundscapes. I think it's this one. List. Nope. Hold on. That's the 126 sound list. Let me see here. So if you do a sound list, that will list all of the sounds that are loaded in for this scene. In this scene, there's like hundreds of there's like 220 megabytes worth of sound, and doesn't list how many there. But I think it's this one, Soundscape Print Debug Info. Okay. So when you do this one, this will list the through like 0 to 8, the name of the soundscape with the location and XYZ coordinates. And that you can see some of these actually repeat. So the main X or the main pistol, the A2 pistol main, A2 pistol main train car main. And so there's different points in which the music may stop and then come up again. And so this number here, though, is the sequence under which those are ordered. And then there's the command here to be able to print all of them just in order in which they're kind of clustered together. But and then from within each of those, you can see what sounds are being played within each of those. So if you can do a Soundscape dump client, and then you click that, and that will tell you your current position, and it'll actually list the entity list index number 8. Or the Soundscape index of 98. So if we go up to 98, we can see that it's the A2 pistol main. So at any moment, if you do like a Soundscape dump client, it'll just tell you what Soundscape you're in. But that's just one way to kind of map how the maps progress is through the Soundscapes. There's 226 of them. And I haven't figured out if some of these, what I'm calling secondary ones, if they're actually used or if they're just kind of left over and they were kind of only using a subsection of those in the actual game. I haven't figured that out yet. I'd have to kind of go around more and looking at that. So that's the sound, which I found really interesting. So that's the show position, and then the show first person, the frames per second. So when I do this one, that is actually going to show me the current map that I'm on, which is helpful when you don't know exactly how the chapters are broken up into these different sections of maps. Because sometimes a chapter will be multiple maps, sometimes it'll just be one scene / map for the entire chapter. So you can see that this is giving me frames per second over there, but also the map name, which is also very helpful. So in terms of kind of positioning yourself in both a scene as well as the position, you're going to need both the map name as well as the position. The angle is the direction in which I'm looking, but the position and the map name should be able to kind of like provide enough of a metaverse positioning system for you. And if you wanted to, you could potentially even start to map out all of these different levels, because these levels are not decompiled, they're encrypted. Valve's going to eventually be releasing some of these tools, the SDK tools, but that's still pretty far away at this point. And so we're still kind of waiting for that to happen. I was just going to, so we don't have those tools yet, but in the meantime, there's a whole community effort that's been trying to get the tools out there available. So because we haven't had an opportunity to actually see the full aspect of these maps, then kind of have to use some of these tools that are from the VConsole as well as the debugging tools, and you can start to get a lot of information. I'm sure there's lots of, you could probably even reconstruct a lot of it, but the challenge is that it's not very well documented. If I go down here to the bottom, there's a list here from Valve for Source 1, where they actually list through like all of the different consoles. And some of these are still valid and still there, but a lot of them have been deprecated or they don't work anymore, or sometimes they're very specific to a game. So Half-Life Alyx is on Source 2. I know Dota is on Source 2, and like there's other games that are like Half-Life 1 and 2 are in Source 1, as well as Counter-Strike, I believe. So there's going to be a process of kind of updating things, but even this documentation doesn't have links to everything, and so you kind of have to experiment around with what's available. Like just even looking here, the sound, all these different soundscapes. I mean, I had to go through and find the ones and what they do, and there's still a lot of stuff here that I haven't gone all the way through, but you can start to like type things to kind of figure out what tools are available. So let's go back here and see where we're at of kind of making our way through this and just kind of chatting. So if you want to turn off that, now this, both the map position and the GPS position, that does not show up at all on your, when you're actually in VR. So that, if you want to actually get that, you have to potentially find a way to, let me turn this off. 0. There we go. Okay. And let's go back to the screen. Okay. So yeah, I was just saying that the position and the frames per second, those don't show up in VR at all. That there might be a way to potentially have the console be able to have that, and then to put it on to some sort of thing that you can bring into VR if you really wanted to look at it. Maybe even do some key bindings to be able to pull up some of this information. There's an Aardvark program by Joe Ludwig that brings in HTML stuff, but that doesn't necessarily bring in a native app. So I'm sure that the modding community may come up with a lot more tools, because there's going to be a lot more capabilities to do like some more amazing stuff within VR. Okay, so I'm going to do this one here, show triggers toggle. So actually, first, before I do this one, I'm going to fly up, like super high up. So I'm going to fly up and look down at this map. Oh God, you know what? I'm going to go to another map. I've found it hard to, let's see, let's just do restart. I found whenever I do that entity, sometimes I can turn it off, sometimes I can't. And when things are moving around, then as you see, the bad thing about that one is that once you turn it on, then you basically see it anywhere you are, and that can get kind of annoying. So SV cheats, I'm not always sure if this persists, and so I do it whenever I reload, no target, just so that the enemies don't bother me. Oh, and then I have to do pause. And that will unpause it. And now I can, I already had the VR Fly enabled, and so it remembered that for me. And as I fly around, I can kind of see this map, and this is a pretty linear map. Some of the other maps, it gets a little bit harder to know exactly like where you go. But, you know, even this though, there might be some sections. There's this command here that is actually pretty performance intensive. It's the show triggers toggle. And what that does is that it shows the bounding boxes for whenever you're triggering. Oh, wait, I misspelled it. Show triggers toggle. There we go. Let's see. Okay, now you see these little boxes there. Those are like boxes for triggering different things within the game. And the boxes are pretty big volume, but they're mapped out pretty closely to kind of a rough section for where you're going here. And you can kind of see by looking at these that just to get an overview of the map as I'm going through, you can kind of see this is just like an L shape here as I'm looking at this. Now, I have to warn you that this particular command is pretty performance intensive, and it makes it a terrible experience when you're actually in VR. So this is a case where, you know, you can get a good sense of the different triggers when you're in VR, and it's a little bit better when you're actually in 2D, because it's, you know, just as a toggle, it takes up a lot of performance. It basically just kills performance just because has to compute a lot. Now, when I go through, I really like this end messages draw. And when you have like a, actually, it doesn't actually show up until you're getting a little bit closer to things, but you can see it here. But sometimes when you're far away, it will disappear, or, you know, you won't be able to look through it. I found sometimes if I go underneath there, the normals, actually the normals are set there, so I can't look through but a lot of times, like over here, you can see I can go underneath and look up at the rooms and still look into things. But when you're actually going through it, you're triggering these, and, you know, actually I went to the end and it's triggering me into the next level. If you ever watch speedrunners, you'll see them that they do that quite a bit as well. It's just getting to the end. Okay, so that's that. The AI path draw, it just draws a line for where very quickly it shows the AI and how the path it's going to be going towards you. But when you have the no targets turned off, this doesn't work. But if you are trying to debug the AI, you can look at that. All right, so the lighting here, I want to do the lighting just because the lighting was a little tricky in different ways. Specifically, there's some different options that I found when I turn off, sometimes it's difficult to go back to normal when I'm in the 2D mode. When I use this in the developer tools, it seems to work a little bit better. Maybe that's because it's doing like a Fulbright 2 or 1. I'm not sure if I have it, but sometimes I found that when I use some of these console commands, and then it would break things within the experience. Like as an example, if you have the developer locomotion on and you're kind of flying around, sometimes it wants you to actually be on the ground in order to trigger things like pushing buttons. Pushing buttons and interacting with things was the most annoying thing. Because it can't actually they stripped out a lot of that stuff. And so sometimes I found myself having to go into VR to be able to actually interact with things because the 2D models aren't, robust enough. So this is still loading. I shouldn't have gone there. As this is loading, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Soundscape stuff because I went over a lot of these and like I said, you could see the sound list to see all of the sounds within a scene. Actually, within a specific soundscape, if you do sound info, I'm not sure if there'll be any that loads up yet. No. Oh, yep. Here we go. So sound info will take the existing soundscape that's loaded. So let's see what that is here. So, doesn't look like it's anything yet, but yeah, it's still loading the level, so it's not quite working completely right. But the point is that you can use that soundscape to be able to see what all of the specific sounds that are playing within that. Now, I haven't found a way to be able to say, like, look at this soundscape and show me all of it if you're not actively there in that moment. But I'm sure there might be a way to do that. Okay, so I'm loaded in again. It's completely dark. So again, I have to do the pause. And then when I do pause, then I'm here and I can kind of go through here. But actually, this is a good one to actually I want to do the SV cheats just to enable all the cheats, do God, just so that I don't accidentally get killed and have to reload. And then no target, just so that all the creatures don't annoy me. Lighting. I already showed you the Fulbright, and I'm not going to mess with that because when I turn it off, I'll do that one last because sometimes I can't undo it and it's annoying. But this white query debug one is pretty cool one because what it does is that it gives me this little ball, and as I move around, that ball reflects the light that is coming from a given scene. So it's hard to see in 2D sometimes. You can actually really see it quite well in VR. You can see that it gets darker over here and it actually kind of disappears, but it's a detector to be able to detect the different light. So there's a lot more light commands that I'll have to figure out still. I was just finding ones that were helpful. Again, as I was going through these commands, some of them worked, some of them didn't work, some of them I couldn't figure out. But the light debug is interesting because that will actually show you the volume of these different lights. And you can see like there's actual light maps, the EMV probe from Valve. So this is actually a good opportunity to hop over into the, let's see, let's minimize that. So there's, find that sometimes the when I have that enabled, it kind of hijacks my cursor. Okay, so so there's a whole SDK for creating maps and mods, and so if you are interested in creating your own maps for Half-Life Alyx, it's actually pretty easy. There's an SDK installation video. There's this source here that's from it's just basically like a bunch of the scripts that you need. Half-Life Alyx SDK. This is the unofficial SDK. This video here is a pretty good walkthrough, and I was able to get stuff up and running. The Valve resource format is the compression format that Valve uses. And then the FGD for Hammer, that's basically like all the files that is like the index of all the different files. And that's from the community that if you download that and just put them in the right directory. This Valve, the VRF, so something that's helpful is to be able to go into Half-Life Alyx, to go to properties, go to local files and browse to your local files. And when you do that, it'll bring you up to all the different files. And what's cool about how Valve makes games is that all of these are available for you to start to look at. Now, these are VPK files, which that normally, if you try to open them up, you're not going to see anything just because it's like their own customized compression format. So all of the information as it's loaded in is compressed into this VPK. So as I see something like this, maps, A2 hideout, light maps, environmental light probe, and that's giving the specific location of where that is, maps, A2 hideout, and then actually that's the skybox. So this is where it got a little confusing. Let's see if I go into the A2 hideout VPK and I open up that, then it's going to open it up in the Valve resource viewer, the VRF, which I got set up separately. But you can actually open this up and decompress things, but the problem is that a lot of it is in this like compiled format, so you can't actually like look at it yet. So here we go, A2 maps and then A2 hideout, and then you can see these light maps, and then you see all this information there. And there's light maps and entities and other information as well. And then as you go through here, there's also other stuff like the A2 hideout skybox. So, but again, a lot of this information, there's sound files and other things you can look at. One of the things that you actually have to do in order to install the customized SDK is actually copy a lot of this stuff over and uncompress all those files. And so you can go through those original files and listen to a lot of those files. If you go back into this here and see, this is listing the soundscapes, but for within each of the soundscapes, if I go back, let's do that now. Actually, to do like a sound info, I can see. Okay, so sound info is that same information for. Let's actually sound. If I do dump sound dump. Actually, what was it? This is the dump sound list, sound info, soundscape dump client. That's what it is. So soundscape dump client will give me the current entity. That's number 7. And then here, when I look at that, then you have to kind of cross-reference to see what the sound info is. But you can see all this information here is playing different sound effects that are playing in the background as you're going through this level. Those sounds ambient that you can go and decompress that and then go listen to stuff. So the sounds I think you can actually listen to in some of the videos and stuff. Some of the other stuff you can't actually get access to. Tyler McVicker from Valve's News Network has been digging into a lot of this stuff. He's got different builds that had information that wasn't in the release build. And so he's been doing this data mining and going through and listening to stuff. But by going through and actually seeing the soundscapes, it actually is putting it into like where things are actually happening. So you can kind of cross-reference that. All right, let's go back to this here. What else do we got? We were looking at the lighting. So the indirect lighting and the direct lighting, there's different modes to sort of turn things off and on. I'm going to go in and do the matte full bright one. I'm actually going to minimize this and sort of get this out of the way. Actually, I'm going to turn that off as well because that is kind of in the way and I don't need that anymore. Okay, so, and let's turn off the light probe. One, oops, 0, and then the light query debug. So querying the light. Okay, so let's make this a little smaller so that when I do that, then you can kind of see in real time. Okay, so the matte full bright. So this gives everything is completely bright and lit. This actually, if you start to develop and make levels, this is what it's going to look like by default without doing any lighting or baking the lighting, and it looks pretty terrible. And if we do 2, that's sort of the version that actually doesn't have the textures or anything on that. That's actually pretty interesting to see just the 3D models without any of the textures. Matte full bright 0, and then going back to normal. So that was working well. Since we have a light there, let's try to see if the indirect lighting, if this does anything. So let's, this is highlighting the indirect lights. Can't see that as much. And sometimes the scenes, depending on what the scene is happening in the scene, you can't actually see things are happening, but I've definitely would need to find really good examples of this. A lot of this for me is just I'm learning this for the first time. I'm not like an expert in this, and so I'm just trying to share what I've been able to figure out. And you can kind of play around with different things. I'm just going to try turning off the direct lighting just to see if that light is having any impact at all. And just a little bit, actually, you can see this stuff. This would actually be good to implement within VR, maybe through hotkeys to kind of toggle these things. Especially, you know, it would be great to have some mod tools specifically to go in and to learn more about the lighting, because the lighting is so important in this experience, and their tools are there to be able to sort of turn things off and on, and so that I think it provides a pretty good opportunity for you to go in and kind of hack around a little bit. And to learn about how they created it, especially, you know, it's like kind of cutting through the matrix to see how they actually created it. And the thing is that you can actually go in and create your own maps and within, you know, and try to recreate some of this as well. They do a masterful job of doing all that. So I kind of went through all these different soundscapes. Again, I'm not sure if there's a way to query the ones that aren't coming up, or maybe they are coming up, and I haven't done the sound dump comprehensively. The maps are the different world maps, and so one thing I wanted to say about those soundscapes is that so these are all the different maps, and the maps go from A1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but there's actually like 11 chapters, and so this is a correspondence to those chapters in the scenes and the soundscapes. So you start off in the intro world, and you could sort of copy and paste that command here, and that would go there. But honestly, if you just do the map space, then all the maps come up that are available, and that's the easiest way to get those different maps. But the reason why there's these two here is because the soundscape entities, as they're listed, they give the 0, 1, 2, 3 in order. But those are corresponding to the list that has like the 83, 84, 85. So for whatever reason, they the first chapter actually starts at like number 83 of all the different soundscapes were created, likely because there was lots of different experimentations and doing other things first before they figured out where to start, and how to really, you know, begin this whole experience. So not surprising that it kind of jumps around. But for each of these worlds, when you list out the soundscapes, it goes from starting at 0, 1, 2, 1, and 2, and then corresponding to those other soundscapes. And each of those soundscapes, again, you can look at what files are involved in that. The intro world 1 and 2 is in the first entanglement, then the quarantine entrance. And by the way, if you haven't played through, there's going to potentially be spoilers in here in terms of just this, but I'm assuming that you've played through if you're watching this at this point. And actually, I'm going to put myself back up. Actually, I was on screen already. Okay. So the quarantine entrance, with then the pistol, then the hideout, and actually some of these were difficult to go through as I was going in 2D because it was difficult to, you have to kind of actually be in VR, and I was just trying to quickly get this information. I would go in and actually have to go to these levels and then to be able to do these queries. Again, there might be a way to get that information without having to do that, but I haven't figured that out yet. And some of these chapters may not be precisely in the right order. I think starting with super weapon, they are, because I went through pretty rigorously, but I didn't play through all of these two, but more or less those are there. So you can go through and look at each of these, but like I said, a lot of times this is a good proxy to see when there's different tonal shifts, how the soundscape changes. Usually there's music that's being played, and that's how you're engaging with different enemies. And so you can kind of roughly see that if there's a lot of soundscapes, then there might be a lot of battles. That's not always the case, but that's just sort of interesting to see. Like, like the Jeff chapter doesn't have as many different soundscapes because it's pretty consistent throughout. So there's that. And again, there's the set position. So it'd be nice to get those and screenshots, and just to have a way to potentially annotate it, maybe drop objects as you're going through and playing it, just so you have some sort of visual indication where those soundscapes begin and end. It's difficult when you're in VR to be able to know when those soundscapes are beginning and ending. So again, that's one of the things I'd like to see, is making it a little bit easier, because the sound is so huge and you can tell so much when the soundscapes change. You can tell it when you're playing it. And so it'd just be nice to be able to have a little bit more information about that. So there's a bunch of different VConsole commands from other Source 1 and Source 2 games. Some of them may or may not work. This is just kind of a dump of things that I was trying out. Some of them work, some of them didn't work, but there's lots of different information that's out there. What I found is that there's a lot of information that when you Google about this, there's people that are trying to do cheat codes to actually be playing, but I'm much more interested in unpacking how things were created. And so it's more about the modding codes that are helpful. But because Source 2 is still so early, then we're kind of waiting for the official things to be released. And so it's kind of, you have to do a lot of work to try to figure out what does what, and try to get to work. It may be deprecated, it may be in there. So it's a little frustrating at this point, but there's still a lot of things that you can do. Okay, now, actually I'm going to stop this version of Half-Life to be able to show another version. Actually, so sometimes I find the easiest way to stop. Somehow, when you do the VR enabled, it hijacks the cursor and it's hard to stop. But if I shut down Steam, in that way, it'll shut it down. Okay, so there's, like I said, there was a release of the preloaded version of Half-Life Alyx that actually had a bunch of additional developer commands that you can do stuff in VR. When you do the VR enabled, it's frustrating because even if you have to push a button, it can be difficult. Sometimes you can get it to work. There's actually some commands. Let's see if I have that up still. No, I don't. There's a list of commands that a configuration file commands that show kind of the hotkeys that I have listed here. Where's that at? Somewhere. I don't know. It's somewhere here. Oh, right here. Actually, let's just go there. And open this up with the notepad. And Oh, actually, is it here? Oh, here we go. Yeah. So I had it open here. So this is the user keys default VCFG. These are the actual keys of moving around, and you can actually change them. And if you go through and watch, there's a whole community of people who don't have VR and want to play through, and they've figured out a lot more how to do that. But there are some nuances of some commands that are available that are not available if you have the regular version. And so there's actually a thing you have to do in order to go through and actually download. There's a whole video that goes through it, but you copy the HLR.exe file, and then you have to do some hex code editing, and then and it sort of shows how to play it in VR. But we'll go back to the Half-Life here, and there's the game, the common. So Half-Life Alyx, there's the game, and then the bin, and then Win64. So that's where the exe is. And so you have to copy that and then do the Half-Life non-VR. So that's a separate exe that has this Half-Life non-VR DLL. It's a dynamic link library that has some additional information. So what you can do is copy this path and then open up like a command prompt, and then switch into that directory. And then now, because I don't know if there's a way to do this, there probably is, but when you launch it from Steam, you can give these extra commands. But this is the Half-Life non-VR VConsole console, and then set the width and height, and then do that, and it launches into this version that actually has a little bit more keys available. So I played with this first, actually, and until I found that the regular version did it, and I was like, I'm just going to use that because it actually was easier to jump into VR, because this is not meant to go in between VR and not VR. Once you do this, you're basically committed to the 2D, but there's some specific things that you can do that are just easier. Like when I was putting up that showing the entity information, it's a lot easier to see that on 2D when it's not moving around and it's not associated to something that is a moving target. So here, I'm going to just load into the intro map. Oh, actually, so it started, and what I have to do first is do the tilde key. That does the VConsole, so that comes up over here. And now that the VConsole is open, then what typically I would do is sort of load a map. Let's just do the intro world map, because that's kind of the very beginning. It takes a while to load in, and there's a little intro sequence that can be a little bit annoying, but just because it's, you've seen it already. So the thing about the SV cheats, to enable that, you can actually do the no clip. And when you do the no clip, then you can start to fly through walls and fly up in the air. There's ways to play this version where you're basically on the ground and you can go through, but the VR Fly enabled automatically has no clip enabled. So you don't have to enable that if you're using the regular version. But the reason why I'm showing this for a couple of reasons. For one is the field of view, which I think is interesting to see. And there's a fake VR test, and if you were actually going to be playing through, there's a little bit more capabilities with using your mouse to be able to interact with things. And that may actually be faster to do that than hopping in and out of VR. It really depends on what you're doing. If you're modding or developing, then you don't always necessarily want to do that. So as this starts up, you can do the SV cheats, should be able to do that. And then you can do the no clip. Well, actually, let's go in here. So as I go through, I can't go off there, but if I do the no clip on, and then once I do that, it lets me fly around. Now you notice that's like way fast. Like you could like try to go up to the top, but and you can kind of see, look around. Oh my gosh. But that's normally pretty fast for what you normally would want to be doing. So let's see, here we go. Let's back to the beginning. Okay, so let's look at this. The SV max speed is what you want to change for that. And let's see what's the default. The default is 320, or actually I don't know if that's what I set it last to be, but if we set that to like 100, then it's better. But you could even go and do like something like 5 if you wanted to get some like, you know, cinematic shots, or you know, maybe even like 25. So if you were, you know, that gives a little bit more of like, you can get like new perspectives and actually take screenshots. The thing that I'm really interested in is just trying to understand the map and have in my mental model in my mind of how the map progresses. And they actually do some interesting, fun things in terms of like, once you get into the elevator here, let's see, once you get into this hallway, oops, that's the wrong hallway. Into this hallway, actually, if you go backwards, you can kind of see the intro levels here from a good good angle. But when you go into the elevator, I don't know if you can click E. Yeah, so interacting with things I haven't quite figured out. Actually, I think there's like a, let me just test this one thing here. Enable fake VR test. No, nope, that's not a real command. There's folks that have been going through and figuring this out more. The main thing why I wanted to show you this though was the field of view, which is super cool. So actually I'm gonna go down to, so when you go down that elevator, it actually goes, oops. If I can't find it, I'll just show it here. Actually, let me get back to the 250, kind of go around a little bit more. Oh, actually, this is a good example of doing that other command. So you can kind of see a lot of stuff and you don't know where the map actually goes. This is an example of the map of it going all over the place. And if I show triggers toggle, that will show me where it actually is, where stuff is. So you actually can see the stuff in the green is where the trigger points are. So you can see actually, this will help you map out, like this is actually a good map to show this because there's the, oh, that's weird. I wonder what that trigger is. That's some other different trigger. So there's a bunch of triggers there for when you are, you know, kind of going through here. So like I just, you know, because I went through that point, that trigger point, it actually triggers this animation that happens. So as you find those triggers, you can, you know, kind of go there and trigger different things. But this is helping me to kind of find the other sections of this map. So let's see. Oops. Okay. So let's go over here. Oops. Oh, it's kind of frozen. So I'm going to turn this off actually because it is very perform. It may have actually crashed. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. So, okay, so this shows you like, you kind of go into the elevator and you come in here. And like, this is actually where I first was playing around with this because I wanted to get a shot of this laundromat, but you know, the ceiling you can't look through. Oh my gosh. So the performance is taking a huge hit. Here. Okay. So this will, if If I go up a little bit, there we go. Okay. So you see the field of view there is okay, but you don't get a good sense. And if you wanted to get a little bit more of a wide shot, the whole reason why I brought into here is that this FOV desired, let's just see what it is. I think it's 75 by default. Yeah, it's 75 by default. But if I set that to like 120, then it gives a little bit more of like a wide angle shot. So you can, if you wanted to start to look at some of the, take a screenshot or get a little bit more information, this will help you to just get more information on there. And you can kind of take some wide angle shots. I don't know what the highest that it goes up to. I think going up to like 150, 130. Yep, that works. 140. Yep, 150. Yeah, 140 or 145. Yeah, like 140. So, or 130. So as you're playing around, it's not a great experience to play around like that. But if you did want to get more information, then especially if you're like trying to get like the floor plan, then this is a good way to start to do that a little bit. All right, let's see if there's anything else as I fly around this. So you can create all sorts of different cinematic shots like that. You can increase the fly speed in the other version as well, but the field of view one, that same command wasn't working, so there might be a way to do it, but I haven't found it out. So I think I covered everything. That's just some extra maps. So let's just wrap it up here. Take off my headphones since I'm not using that. So, all right, well, thanks for sitting through this. I wanted to just like document that for myself and just share it. I know it's a little rough on the edges. I'm actually live streaming this, so I'm doing it live and just in the effort of trying to get the information out there. If you want to learn, there's other resources, but the specific use case I have is a little bit different than just wanting to play the game. It's more about analyzing the game and looking at the experiential design, and potentially even creating some different mods. Half-Life Alyx is really exciting to me just because it's a bit of like the community has done so much already with being able to take the tools that are there without having any official software development kit. I'm not going to walk through how to do Hammer. There's other videos of creating maps and whatnot. And actually, if you go through that process, you could see what the different variables are for different things, and maybe start to play with it a little bit more and in a more interactive way. And then as you do the entity messages when you're actually in VR, you can have a little bit better sense of parsing what's important and what's different amongst those different enemies. You can look at textures, you can look at objects. There's ways that you can query where the assets are from what you're seeing, and this whole modding. There's so many things that have coming out of modding, and I'm just excited to see what this community does. And it's still very early days. A lot of folks are saying, once the tools are released, then it's going to really open up. But there's already a lot that can be done, and also just the more that you figure out, then the more of an opportunity that you could, kind of do it without, having the tools that are available. But there's a lot of information that's there that you can start to get information on. I'm going to be diving in and doing a live stream later on Saturday with a couple other architects. And so I mainly was doing this for them to be able to look at that, but also to go through the process of sharing this information out. So, with that, thanks for joining me on this live stream.